Good morning. This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it's time for Avoid the Maze. And I have a very special guest, but I'm going to tell you, I'm not going to read her bio. Um, Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but it's going to be in the show notes. And after you listen to today's show, I want you to go back and read her bio and ask yourself, is there anything in her story that I'm feeling? Because when I read Rachel's bio, I had to ask myself, did I write it or did she? And I think so many of us women today, we just keep giving ourselves to everybody else. We were taught you're going to grow up, you're going to have a career, you're going to get married, you're going to have kids, you may need to take care of your parents. All these things were like thrown at us. And many of us caught it all and said, I got to do all of this, realizing at some point we're breaking because as much as we think we want to do it, we're not achieving the life that we need. Again, my guest is Rachel Brown. I met her through podmatch.com, and I have to thank Podmatch for all the work they do and all the wonderful people that they bring together, because this is how I grow, learning their stories. So, Rachel, take us on a little tour of who you are and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. I have a very interesting story, really. I grew up in a normal family, I had mum and dad, I had a sister. But from about the age of 8, my mum realised that something wasn't quite right. I used to be the tallest in my class at age 8, and then it got to age 12, and I had completely stopped growing. I was the smallest in my class. I wasn't, my body wasn't doing the things that a normal 12-year-old girl would do. And so from that point on, I started on a 16-year journey to try and understand what was going on in my body. I had all sorts of tests for, it was for um, gluten intolerance, for diabetes, for so much stuff was thrown at me, and sometimes twice, because in the middle of that we moved from one place to another. And it was really that led, well, it was the start of a very, very long journey. I was brought up to be to work hard, to achieve as much as I could. And actually, my illness, because it was such a rare illness. It was called Cushing's disease, which is where you have a benign tumor on your pituitary. And now your pituitary is the control gland
Right.
of everything, all the hormones in your body. And this pituitary tumor was causing 10 times too much stress hormone to course through my body, and no other hormones whatsoever. It was life limiting. And so finally, after 16 years, they discovered what it was, took the tumor out, saying, "You'll be cured, Rachel." But actually, it left me with another life-limiting illness called panhypopituitarism, which means my pituitary doesn't produce any hormones at all. So I live on tablets, really. And I think the whole journey, to start with, knocked my confidence. Every 6 months, I would go thinking, this time they're going to tell me what's wrong. And every time I came away thinking, they still don't know what's wrong with me. And so, I led the normal. My parents said, yeah, we need to go to education, higher education. We need to do this job and this job. And I followed that to the letter. But every so often, once I'd done a job, it got to the point where I was like, I really don't like this. It's not aligned with what I enjoy. And I kept going and I kept going until I was early 40s. I'd been in that many jobs that I was good at. I gave my all to them, but it just didn't feel right. By this time, I'd had two children via IVF because I couldn't have them naturally. And the stress of dealing with my children, getting them dropped off to school, picking them up, doing a job, running the household, it just landed. I was like completely exhausted. And I decided this was the time to run my business. And I felt deeply that I needed to speak out on my experience, to tell other mothers that what I had been through was actually a gift, that I am the one in my family who has been gifted this illness, however terrible it was, to break that generational pattern of stress that had been passed down through the line
Sure.
and work through it so that not only could I heal, but my family and their families. And so that led me on a whole journey of generational healing and mental healing and all sorts of things like that. So, yeah, a long story.
Absolutely. But, we believe that modern medicine should have the answers. And modern medicine has a lot of answers, but they don't always fit. When I say that, for the past year, I've gone through some medical things, broke my shoulder, had to, go through physical therapy on that. Um, Soon thereafter, I fell again. I broke my left wrist. And so my body, even though I'm being told you're healing, you're doing great, I just haven't felt great.
Mhm.
And go to the doctor, and the doctor would say to me, "Oh, you know, you're 75 years old. What do you want?" And I go, "But before I broke my shoulder, I had all this energy. I don't have it anymore. And yet my shoulder is healed and my wrist now is healed." And they would keep saying to me, "We don't know." And then again, running through test after test. And I finally had to accept the fact that there may not be any real answers, but this doesn't mean I can't keep looking. It doesn't mean I'm not going to keep living. So you have to start adapting. And it sounds like to some degree that's what you did as well. You know, you you took care of what you could medically, but after that, it's up to you to make those adaptations. And working from home and having your own business is one way of doing it because most employers don't want us sitting in their business thinking to ourselves, do I really want to be here?
Yeah, and I have to say it's not an easy option working for yourself. I think what I've found in working with my illness is that we can use our bodies and we can use our emotions to help us heal. Physical symptoms are one way, emotions are another way, how our body feels is another way. So much of modern medicine is dealing with the symptoms, and to really, really work through and start to feel better and rediscover your true self. I really believe you have to deal with the root. And that's where I sort of work from. I deal with the 5 levels of healing. So mental, energetic, emotional, physical, and spiritual, because everything is energy. And so many people miss out the energetics. We
Yes,
have a thought, it starts to move, it becomes energy. We need to release that energy from our field, otherwise it gets stuck in our body. And so I find it fascinating how often, you can feel somebody in the room, or you can be attracted to a certain color because of its energy. And it just is so amazing how we can heal in so many different ways.
And as you talk about healing, when we go to modern medicine, they look for the symptom, maybe the root cause, but they don't necessarily talk about all those other energy fields that may be making it worse or better. I happen to be very lucky. I have a wonderful primary care doctor, and I went to him a couple weeks ago, just totally drained, feeling nauseated all the time, dizzy. I mean, I had this whole list, and truthfully, my husband thought I was dying, and I said, I'm not dying, but there's something wrong. And when I went in with the list, he looked at it, and he said, where do you feel the dizziness? Now, my first reaction was, well, of course, it's in my head and in my eyes and in my ears. And he goes, where do you feel it? And I realized I was feeling it in my gut. He said, and on here you say you're nauseous. I said, yes. And we went through those things, and he kept saying, does anything make it feel better? And I thought about it. And when I was thinking about it, I wasn't nauseous. I wasn't dizzy. And he said, something has been holding you back. He said, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist, but something's holding you back. So we're going to work on that. He said, I can run a bunch of tests today. I don't think you need them. He said, what I want you to do is go home. And he said, you journal. He said, I want you to definitely journal every time you feel good. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? It's now been 10 days. Do I have nausea? Yeah, a little bit. Do I get dizzy? Yeah, a little bit. But not like I was 10 days ago. Because as soon as it happens, I'm now asking myself, where's it coming from? Do I have control? And if you have control, you can heal yourself.
Yeah. And I think once you recognize and name what's going on, it brings it to the surface. And it's interesting you saying that your nausea is in your tummy, because I do a lot with the chakras. And so if somebody's got a sore throat, for example, there's probably some blockage in their throat chakra. They're not expressing themselves. And again, it's just such a different way of looking at things, but so often it's so clear that this is what's happening because of the energy or what have you. So yeah, it's fascinating.
So when you decided to start your business, you obviously had the experiences growing up with an illness, um, not having a real diagnosis for a long time. But one of the things we hear a lot with coaches, and I go through it a lot myself, we feel like imposters because we're sharing our story, but sometimes we're not sharing the data. And so I always have to remind myself that I have to allow my clients to know that I do have the data, I do have the training, but it's my experiences that is driving me to share it. What did you have to do when you started your business so that people understood what you were offering?
I think a lot of it is, as you say, personal stories. It's based on what I've done to heal myself, but I've also had coaches who work in the energetic and spiritual field. So they've supported me with techniques to get through things. And so it's a combination of how I've dealt with it. People love to know about people. So if you share your own experiences and say, this is what I've done, this is how it turned out, this is what I've been taught, this is how it turned out, that's how people know, like, and trust you, and then start to put it into practice in their own lives.
And I think the important part too is that we all have to know that as individuals, we're going to react differently to the different energy fields.
Mm.
I remember, oh boy, this probably goes back 30, 40 years. I did have a doctor who was trying to describe the energy fields to me. And I sat there thinking, oh, this person, they're so hokey. Just give me a prescription and let me go home. And it wasn't until I started coaching and talking to other coaches like yourself, realizing that when we say that we feel something, we believe it's just up in our head because this is what we're thinking, so this is what we feel. But the reality of it is, it's coming from somewhere else. Something is bringing that to us. Yes, our brain is resonating it, but maybe you're feeling it in your hands. Maybe you're feeling it in your gut. And that's where those chakras come in. So can you describe those to my listeners? Because I was just introduced to the chakras probably a couple of years ago, and it's like, wow, that's all within me.
Yeah. So the chakras are often called energy centers as well, and there are actually well, not millions, but there are many energy centers. But the main ones that people talk about are the ones that are basically within our body, and we start at the base of the spine with the root chakra, and this is commonly linked to the color red, but some people see it differently. Again, as you say, people recognize these things differently. And this is all to do with safety and security and our physical body. And what you were saying about the emotions going into different parts, what I've discovered generally is that behind emotions are limiting beliefs. We have a thought, it starts to move, become energy. And as energy moves, it becomes an emotion. Emotere is energy in motion, the Latin for energy in motion. And we have about 90 seconds to recognize this energy and this emotion and to release it before the energy gets funneled into our body and it comes to rest in one of these energy centers or chakras, depending on the limiting belief behind it. So for the root chakra, if, for example, you are feeling scared that you haven't got enough money, that's lack. It's lack of safety and security. So that emotion linked to it will go to our root chakra. The second energy center up is our sacral chakra. This is all to do with our needs, our wants, our desires. It's linked to our sexual organs. And again, emotions can come in there if for example, we don't get something that we need, or if our relationships aren't as we would like them. The next level up is our solar plexus chakra. This is all linked to our confidence, our identity as a person, our personal power. Then we've got our heart chakra. This is self-worth, loving ourselves, being loved, loving other people. The throat chakra, obviously at the throat, self-expression, creativity. Third eye chakra is just between the eyebrows. This is intuition, knowing your place in the world, sort of funneling your own beliefs as opposed to other people's beliefs. And the crown chakra is the most spiritual. So it's really where everything comes in and we start to filter what we believe as opposed to what other people believe, what our purpose is. And the thing with these chakras as well is that the longer that we don't recognize the emotions and the limiting beliefs, the more these energies build up in our body. And over time, we can then get physical issues. So we can also use that physical issue to identify which area we need to work on. So if we've got lower back pain, something in the root chakra is blocked, and so on and so forth.
I love that. I love the explanation because, you know, I remember growing up, my dad used to get a lot of back pain. And he would tell my mom when he got back pain what was bothering him. And if he could talk it out, he didn't have to go to the chiropractor. He didn't have to do his exercises. Talking it out, all of a sudden, his pain was gone. Um, my mother used to think it was hokey. And so she would say to him, go to the chiropractor. And he'd go to the chiropractor, not talk about it. And it was week after week after week being treated. And it was when I got older, we had a conversation about, Dad, you've had so much back problem. He said, if you've noticed, I don't have it as much anymore. And I said, how's that? He said, because I go to my computer and I write it all out and it goes away. And I became a journaler like that when my father passed away. For some reason, until he passed away, I didn't see the need to do it. But then I started realizing, something just isn't right. My head hurts, my back hurts, whatever. And I would sit down at the computer, write it all out, whether I shared it with anybody or not. And I could release pain. Now, if it was a true physical pain, I had gotten hurt or injured in some way, maybe I could reduce it a little bit. But I'm talking about the emotional pains. And I journal every single day for that exact reason. Whatever comes to my mind, I can tell that's sort of trying to hold me down. I'm going to get it out. And when I get it out, I feel released. And so that's what I encourage my clients to do. So what are some of the tips you give your clients?
Well, because I work a lot with mums, our children are our biggest trigger. And so whenever we are triggered by our children, rather than reacting, it's an opportunity to stop and think, what emotion is coming up for me that's making me be triggered? And instead of reacting, take a pause, breathe. We need to reset our nervous system in those moments because all these patterns that we've picked up over our lives have got stuck.
Right.
And then respond rather than react, but also work through, what is this emotion? Where do I feel it in my body? When do I first remember feeling this emotion? Because so often these emotions and the limiting beliefs linked to them have come from childhood, particularly between the age of 0 and 7, because we're such a sponge at that age. We take on board everything our parents say, everything our teachers say, and we believe it, but it's not who we are necessarily. And so those triggers by our family are one of the best ways for mums in particular to start to take back their power. And what's so fascinating and what has really been amazing to me is that the more that I have started to look after myself, to work through that emotional pain, and release it, the more I've been able to pull in positive energy. And that energy sits in my field, and my children then feel it. And so they respond in a different way. They're more open to dealing with or helping with chores. We don't have arguments anymore. It's a much more harmonious, much more happy family household. And that's the power of energy, the power of dealing with our emotions. And journaling does come into it, because whenever we have an emotion that makes us feel out of sorts, that's our body telling us something is out of line. We are out of alignment. We have to work through it. And so often, because as you said right at the beginning, we as mums have so much to deal with. And in the olden days, probably our grandparents, they weren't really expected to work, but now women are expected to work. They're expected to bring the house, do the housework. They're expected to look after the children, do the taxis, and we have so much thrown at us. We don't have that time, or we don't make time, I would say, to focus on what's important. We feel that we don't have time. We feel that we're overwhelmed. But the only way we're going to deal with that is to take time. And when we take time, we'll find we have more time and things become easier. And that's where the difficulty is at the moment with getting people to think in that way, because it's so alien.
Well, and I'm really sad that I didn't know all this when I was raising my sons, because I, like so many, I was working, I was running, um, I was doing what I thought was expected of me, and I wanted to please everybody. And so, in pleasing, I couldn't understand why I didn't feel good at the end of the day. Um, my youngest son, who is now a very young adult, when he moved away 4 years ago, our relationship changed, but it changed for the best. And it changed because all of a sudden I didn't have this pressure of him being here as a young adult, still living under our roof, trying to, see him as an adult, but yet he lived here for 25 years. So in my mind, he's still a little boy. And that was conflicting in our relationship. But when he moved, the two of us basically changed. And we have become the best of friends. We can argue and not get mad at each other. Whereas when he was growing up, if we argued, one of us or both of us were mad at each other and we went our separate ways, which didn't resolve anything. And we laugh about it now, that I didn't learn from that, Mom. And I'd say, well, I didn't learn either. So I did it again the next time. I agree with you. I think moms need support. I'm not saying dads don't. I'm not saying dads don't do their fair share, because in many cases they do. But in majority of homes, it is the mom who is the caretaker of everybody, including dad. And possibly they're in a sandwich relationship where there's grandparents to take care of or other adults. So how can people find you and learn more about you and get your wisdom and support?
Yeah. I believe I've given you a link to a free guide, which is called Reactive to Regulated, which is about calming our nervous system, which is what I was saying when we're triggered. And that's one of the ways. There's also a little bit at the bottom about emotional healing as well. I also have a Facebook group, which is called Conscious Motherhood Collective. So you can find me there. And I have an Instagram page which is @_Rachel E. Brown_. And if you want to know more, I'm actually bringing out a self-study course very soon, which works through all 5 levels, and can really introduce the whole idea of working through those thoughts leading to emotions and everything. So that's something to look out for as well.
Absolutely. And you mentioned a number of times the common limiting beliefs, and we all have them. Um, I went through a course a couple years ago, and all of a sudden I realized I had my mother on one shoulder telling me something, and I had the future of me over here saying, don't listen. And I was having a real hard time in the course because I allowed these two voices to try to block what I was learning. And I reached out to the coach, and she said to me, "Did you ever turn to your right and tell your mother to get off your shoulder?" I said, "Well, she's not really there." She said, "Try it." She said, "And did you ever turn to the left and tell yourself to shut up and listen and learn?" And I said, "No." She said, "Okay, before the next session, I need you to do that. And then after the session, tell me what you got out of it." And I kept letting my mother come back to me, kept myself away. And I had to work through it. Why? What was so important in her message that I was letting it come through? And there were some important things. And I realized this wasn't all negative talk. A lot of it I needed to hear. So we do all have limiting beliefs, but we all can work through them. And I think Rachel Brown has a great program. So everybody listening, follow her, learn more about yourself, and make each day a glorious day.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. It's been wonderful. Talk to
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Bye.